Hey everyone, as a part of the PDHPE course in the HSC, you might have done sports medicine. And in sports medicine, there's this point where it talks about environmental considerations when playing sport, and what environmental considerations actually need to be made in order to not reduce performance. Okay, so firstly, these are the factors that I'm going to be looking at today, but first off, I'm going to be looking at some other stuff as well, just as a basis to build on top. So what is temperature regulation? Temperature regulation is basically when the body keeps the temperature at a constant of 37 to 38 degrees. So I'll just write that here. Okay, so somewhere in between there is the constant temperature that the body needs to be kept at in order for optimal performance. Anything out of this range can cause problems and a decrease in performance, pretty much. So in environments, we need the environments to be somewhere between 15 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius. And if it's between these two ranges, then the body can actually regulate its temperature really well. Now this is where all the factors come in. We've got temperature, humidity, wind, rain, pollution, and altitude. Okay, so I'm going to go into detail about temperature first. So in temperature, if the temperature gets higher, so suppose it gets an increase in temperature, then the body cannot actually regulate its temperature that well, or it needs to do a lot of things to actually regulate it. And now, the main part of this syllabus for environmental considerations is to talk about strategies. So instead of actually describing temperature and doing all that, I'm just going to be talking about strategies to combat an increase in temperature, a decrease in temperature, and so on. So to combat an increase in temperature, what can we do? Well, we can definitely move to the shade, have more drink breaks, okay, other than that, you could wear loose clothing, and you could also wear white clothing. So this is just an example of some strategies that you could use to combat high temperatures in order to decrease the negative effect it has on performance in sports. Okay, so what if there's a decrease in temperature? Well, in order for if there's a decrease, then it's pretty much just adding on more layers of clothes. That's pretty much it. And actually even having a good warm-up. Now, if you realize humidity and temperature, they're pretty much the same thing, and they have the same effects on the athlete negatively or positively in whatever way. So when you actually write this in an extended response, you can group it in with humidity. Remember, in this actual video, I haven't actually defined what temperature, humidity, and all of the different things are. Mainly because the assess point, the learn to, is about the strategies that you can use to combat this. And it's most likely that they're going to ask you an extended response on this. Or not an extended response, but at least something that asks you specifically about strategies. And if not, all the general terms should just be you should be able to derive them in a test, because temperature, that's not too hard to define, humidity, not hard to define, none of them are actually hard to define or describe. But make sure it's always in the context of fitness or the athlete or whatever sport you're working on when they ask you the question. Okay, cool. We'll move on to wind and rain. So for wind and rain, it's kind of similar. So as you can see, again, I've grouped these two together because they have very similar strategies. If it's going to be windy, right, and if it's going to be rainy, the chances are it's going to be a cooler climate. And chances are that the body temperature is going to drop. Decreases. So because of this, once again, we can do something like wear more protective layers, have dry clothes available, and in fact you can even change the date of when you're playing. So don't play at all. So these are some strategies that you can use to combat performance loss inside through the negative effects of wind and rain. And that's mainly because wind and rain decrease body temperature, and that's why you should have these strategies. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was pollution and altitude. If you think about it, if you're at high altitudes and if you have a lot of pollution available, then it's kind of obvious that there's going to be less oxygen available. So decrease in oxygen levels, and because of this decrease in oxygen levels, we need to come up with a few strategies. Well, in this case, there's not really much you could do, except the main strategy that you could do is acclimatize. Okay, so maybe you guys don't know what acclimatize means. I'll just quickly define it now. So acclimatize is when an athlete actually trains in that specific area or gets used to that area. And when they actually do that, their body lets out a physiological response, which allows it to quickly adapt to the type of temperature and the type of differences or whatever it is in that environment. So if an athlete were to train in a high altitude area for suppose 2 weeks or a week, then his body would be more used to that high altitude area and it would be able to cope and compete in such an area because it already understands and it's already been physiologically adapted into that area. Okay, perfect. I can give you a little example. Suppose at night time, if you're just looking and looking and looking, at first it's really dark, but if you stay there for a while, the physiological advantage is that you can actually see everything after a bit, because your eyes have adapted. And that's basically the same thing here. If you stay in that area for a little time, suppose like a week or 2 weeks, and you train in that area, your body gets used to that area, and therefore it can actually perform or do whatever it needs to do in that area. Perfect. And because of this, there's pollution and altitude, same thing. If there's pollution, less oxygen. If there's altitude, less oxygen. Pretty much the same thing. If it's at a higher altitude, I mean. Okay, so if we go back up, we've covered temperature, humidity, wind, rain, pollution, and altitude. There's some other stuff that we need to know about in the considerations part, and that's something like guidelines for fluid intake. Okay, so for the guidelines, there's something really simple that you can just follow all the time, and you should be able to get your marks in this. It's 500 mLs of water before, and then you have 250 ml water every 15 minutes. And then lastly, you have 500 ml of water just after. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's the guidelines for fluid intake. That's all you need to remember. It's in order to keep your body well hydrated. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'll see you next time.